There are people who live without friends, not because they despise others, nor because they wish to be alone, but because somehow life has slowly arranged itself that way. They drift through their days quietly, appearing functional, polite, and even content. Yet beneath that composed surface is a subtle ache, a faint echo of something missing. It's not the absence of company they feel most sharply, but the absence of belonging, of someone to whom their inner world truly matters. They might attend gatherings, talk casually at work, or exchange polite messages online, but there is a strange distance between themselves and others, as though an invisible wall stands between their mind and the world. They observe how easily others seem to connect, how naturally laughter and closeness arise in some circles, and wonder if there is a code they never learned. It's not jealousy they feel, more like quiet confusion mixed with resignation. When they lie in bed at night, they sometimes question what is wrong with them. Are they too quiet, too strange, too cautious? Have they become so self-contained that no one can enter? But then they recall the few times they did try to open up, only to feel unseen or misunderstood. And so a silent contract was signed, to stop expecting, to stop needing, to live safely within one's own walls. Yet this safety carries a heavy stillness. The world feels muted, like a film with the sound turned low. They've learned to endure their own company, to rationalize solitude as independence, to pretend that not needing anyone is freedom. But deep inside, a softer truth hums. It's not that they never wanted friends. It's that they once wanted them too much, and learned that wanting can hurt. Psychologically, the absence of friendship is rarely a mere social deficit. It is often the echo of deeper, relational patterns shaped long before adulthood. People who have no friends are not always antisocial. Many are simply wounded in ways that make closeness feel perilous. The roots of isolation can often be traced back to early attachment dynamics. The avoidant child who learned that expressing need leads to disappointment, or the anxious child whose longing for connection was met with inconsistency. Over time, the nervous system learns a lesson more powerful than any conscious decision: that emotional safety lies in self-containment. This self-containment, though protective, gradually becomes a cage. Adults who grew up this way may appear calm, composed, and highly self-reliant. They are the ones who seem fine on their own, independent to a fault. Yet, beneath that independence is often a suppressed fear of rejection so deep that it sabotages every attempt at intimacy. When someone gets too close, the body tightens. The mind starts scanning for danger, and withdrawal feels like survival. Other psychological mechanisms reinforce this distance. Intellectualization, for instance, allows one to analyze emotion instead of feeling it. The person becomes an observer of their own pain, never its participant. Detachment numbs disappointment before it can occur. Perfectionism and self-sufficiency disguise vulnerability as virtue. Over years, these defenses solidify into identity. I'm just not a people person. Yet, behind this statement lies exhaustion. It takes effort to maintain emotional distance, to constantly manage one's exposure to others, to hide the quiet envy of those who connect with ease. The psyche protects itself through withdrawal, but at a high cost. It forfeits the chance to be truly mirrored by another human being. And so, the mind becomes a closed system, brilliant in analysis but barren in intimacy. Here lies the paradox. Those who have no friends are often the ones who feel most deeply, who notice what others overlook, who possess a sensitivity that makes ordinary connection feel insufficient. Their solitude is not born from indifference, but from the exhaustion of trying to fit into a rhythm that does not match their inner tempo. They perceive subtleties in tone, inconsistencies in affection, and the quiet falseness that can inhabit social rituals. To such a mind, The small talk that bonds others feels like a language without meaning. And yet, this very sensitivity that enriches their inner life also isolates them. They long for a depth of understanding that is rare, to be known without having to explain, to be safe enough to stop performing. But that kind of connection requires vulnerability, and vulnerability is the one thing they've been taught to fear. So they hover at the threshold of friendship, craving closeness, but retreating the moment it feels real. This creates an exquisite tension between yearning and avoidance. Their heart extends outward, quietly, invisibly, but their defenses pull back with equal strength. When someone reaches out, they may smile and respond kindly, yet internally they calculate the emotional risk. Will this person stay? Will they see me? Will I lose myself if I let them in? These questions arise not from arrogance, but from the memory of being unseen. Over time, they develop a paradoxical comfort in solitude. They tell themselves that aloneness is freedom, and in many ways, it is. They can think, create, and exist without compromise. But freedom without connection can feel hollow, like a song played in an empty room. They become masters of self-containment, yet secretly yearn for someone to breach their borders. Their independence is real, but it was never meant to be absolute. It is the armor of a soul that once tried to love, and learned that safety was easier than sincerity. Solitude, over time, stops being a condition and becomes an identity. What once began as protection gradually transforms into pride. The person without friends starts to see themselves as someone apart, someone who doesn't need the trivial comfort others constantly chase. They begin to derive meaning, even moral strength, from their detachment. To need no one becomes a quiet victory, a private proof of resilience. They may tell themselves, "I'm better off alone," and sometimes they truly believe it. But beneath that belief lies an older truth, that isolation feels safer than the disappointment of unmet intimacy. This is the deeper paradox, the transformation of pain into philosophy. When loneliness hardens into worldview, it starts to masquerade as enlightenment. The individual might see their detachment as clarity, their distance as maturity. I've seen through people, they might think, their motives, their noise, their need to belong. But this insight is often tinged with sorrow. It is not disdain that isolates them, but disillusionment. The quiet conviction that connection will never match the depth of their inner world. There is also an unconscious pride in being misunderstood. To stand apart from others can feel like evidence of depth, as if alienation itself were a badge of authenticity. The mind whispers, "Perhaps I am meant to be alone, because others are too shallow to understand me." This thought soothes the wound, but deepens the separation. The self becomes a fortress built on truth and pain in equal measure. Yet this fortress has a cost. Inside, emotions lose their shape. Without the mirror of friendship, one's sense of self becomes abstract, overly introspective, and at times unreal. Thoughts echo without being answered. Feelings swirl without grounding. Alienation becomes not just a defense, but a lens through which all life is seen. The world grows smaller, not in geography, but in meaning. And even as the person claims to prefer it that way, a quiet part of them still waits for someone someday to knock on the door they no longer admit exists. When isolation ripens into philosophy, the question eventually arises: what does friendship mean, really? Is it merely companionship? Two people filling silence with conversation? Or something sacred, a meeting of souls that confirms one's existence? For those who live without friends, this question takes on existential weight. They have lived long enough in their own company to see that self-sufficiency, though admirable, does not complete the human experience. In a world obsessed with independence, friendship can seem almost archaic, a remnant of a time when emotional interdependence was not a weakness, but a truth. We are told to be whole on our own, to rely on no one, to treat connection as optional self-expression. And yet, when the nights grow long and the noise of achievement fades, something in us still longs to be recognized, not for what we do, but for simply existing. People who have no friends often understand this better than most. They have tasted both extremes, the pain of rejection and the hollow relief of withdrawal. Having chosen safety over connection, they begin to wonder whether safety is truly living. The walls that once protected them now keep out meaning itself. They realize that solitude, while freeing, also limits the mind's horizon. For without being reflected in another's eyes, even self-knowledge becomes partial. Friendship, then, is not just about companionship, but about recognition. It is the moment one consciousness acknowledges another, saying, "I see you." In that recognition, something ancient awakens. The reminder that the self was never designed to exist in isolation. Even in silence, being understood by another gives shape to one's inner world. To live without friends is to dwell in a kind of spiritual fasting, clean, clear, and hollow. There is beauty in it, yes, but also starvation. One begins to hunger not for people, but for presence, for the rare, unguarded meeting of minds that makes existence feel less like exile and more like belonging. Yet even when friendship arrives, when someone finally sees, listens, and stays, the truth remains that a kind of solitude never leaves us. Beneath every bond, there is an invisible border that no one can cross, the boundary of consciousness itself. No matter how close we come to another, we still inhabit our own mind alone. The person who has lived without friends understands this intuitively. Their loneliness is not only social, but existential. The loneliness of being a self-aware being in a world of separate souls. In this light, having no friends is not just a social circumstance, but a mirror of a universal condition. Every human, no matter how surrounded, must face the silent reality that no one can fully experience their thoughts, their pain, their particular rhythm of being. Even love, that deepest form of connection, cannot dissolve the separateness between two consciousnesses. We touch, we speak, we share. But we remain ultimately solitary in our perception. To realize this is not despair but awakening. It transforms the narrative from "I am alone" to "we are all alone, together." The solitude that once felt like punishment becomes a truth of existence. The same truth that drives poets, philosophers, and mystics to seek meaning beyond the visible world. Friendship, then, becomes not a cure for loneliness, but a gesture of solidarity within it. Two souls acknowledging their shared exile. Those who have no friends often live closer to this truth, even if painfully so. Their silence forces them to confront what others distract themselves from, the vastness within. And in that confrontation, something shifts. Loneliness stops being an absence and becomes a form of awareness, a quiet intimacy with existence itself. From that awareness grows compassion for others who also carry this invisible burden, for the passerby who smiles without speaking, for the ones who laugh loudly but hide a quiet ache. To understand one's own solitude is to begin to understand the solitude of all. Healing begins not with seeking more people, but with turning gently toward oneself. Not the defended self that says, "I don't need anyone," but the quiet, tender one that still longs to be seen. Friendship, in its truest form, cannot begin until this inner friendship does. For when we are at war with our own vulnerability, every attempt at connection becomes a negotiation of fear. To open the heart to others, one must first stop closing it to themselves. The first act of healing is honesty, the courage to admit, "I am lonely," not as a confession of failure, but as a statement of humanity. Loneliness is not a defect of character, It is a sign that our soul still remembers what it means to belong. In acknowledging it, the armor begins to crack. Small gestures, a genuine conversation, a moment of shared laughter, a single act of trust can begin to seep through those cracks like light through old stone. Relearning connection is not about becoming social, but becoming real. It means showing up as we are, without the performance of self-sufficiency. It means allowing others to see the parts we once hid. The uncertainty, the longing, the imperfection. True friendship begins not when we impress, but when we stop pretending. The people who can meet us there may be few, but they are enough. Ultimately, the psychology of having no friends is not the story of isolation, but of the long journey toward authenticity. Those who have lived in solitude have seen the contours of their own soul more clearly than most. Their task is not to erase their aloneness, but to integrate it. To let solitude and connection coexist without conflict. In the end, friendship is not about filling an emptiness, but about sharing consciousness. Two minds standing side by side in the quiet wonder of being alive. When one can sit with themselves without fear, they are finally ready to sit beside another without armor. That is where the real companionship begins. Not in the avoidance of loneliness, but in its gentle acceptance.